Alabama has given you no shortage of news here recently. What's the latest with the Crimson Tide?
Man, I mean, whether you're talking the team or recruiting, there's a lot going on. And, in recruiting, I think it's a wait-and-see game. Right now, Bama has 21 commitments. Obviously, that means the numbers are going to be tight, throughout this season, but there's still some clear priority guys, and two of them could be making decisions literally any day now. One of them is a five-star wide receiver, Devontae Smith, out of Louisiana, number one prospect in that very fertile state. Bama in the driver's seat for that commitment. He's good friends with Shaheem Carter. He's committed to Jeremy Pruitt and Sam Petito in the past when they were at UGA. Now, of course, both at Alabama, so Bama feels good there. And then the other is Jedrick Wills, big-time offensive lineman, number one prospect in Kentucky, Scout 100 overall guy, a big, clear offensive tackle type who Bama has been battling with Kentucky for. Of course, the Wildcats want to keep him home. However, the latest buzz and trends have Wills ending up at Alabama to be the latest in what's looking like what could be one of the best offensive line groups we've ever seen in one recruiting class. And we hear that may not be the end of it for Bama. This could be something pretty special to keep track with the big guys up front.
Who else is Alabama looking at along the offensive line front? Is it Isaiah Wilson out of New York?
Yeah, number one player in New York, Isaiah Wilson's a guy that Bama would love to bring in. He's more of a project type probably. Of course, not great competition up there, not as polished as some of these other guys, but certainly you don't want to say no to a guy like that, 6'8", 320 pounds. I mean, he looks like he's playing in the NFL right now. And then another one, a little closer to home, Trey Smith, top 20 prospect in the country. Five-star guy. He's taking his time, and Wilson is too. So the good thing for Bama is if they do land Wills, or even if they don't, there's a lot of time to make up their positioning for those other two guys who are looking to commit sometime in December or maybe even January, since they're both All-American type guys. So Bama has time to assemble that top class and hold on to the four guys they do currently have committed as well.
Well, it is a shame. You mentioned Devonta Smith a little bit earlier, the wide receiver out of Louisiana. Obviously, everybody thinking of everybody in that area having to deal with all the flooding, and that was one of the reasons he postponed, correct?
Right, yeah. I was told that was the reason. His decision has been made, and he just wanted to kind of have a ceremony, put it out there, represent his school, but obviously the flooding has really set everybody back, and out of respect to those people and the priority that the entire state needs to take, he didn't want to draw attention to himself, and his coaches thought pushing it back would be the smarter call. Now, no date has yet been set, but we would imagine it to come down the pike here fairly soon, probably by the end of August. He wants to get it done as soon as possible so he can focus on his high school roster.
Devonta Smith obviously looks to be leaning to Alabama. They've already got a really good receiving core. But there's some other guys out there. There's still Nico Collins at Clay Chalkville, who just got named number 2 in the state by AL.com, and I've seen him play several times. He is a phenomenal athlete. And then there's also the Jeff Thomas kid out of Illinois, I believe it is, and he's great on film, but I know there's some other things behind the scenes that may work against him coming to Alabama.
Yeah, timing is going to be interesting for Jeff. He wanted to get a decision done this summer, but academically, there just wasn't enough to go ahead and go through with that process. So one of the reasons could be because Bama really likes Henry Ruggs, an in-state guy who has a similar skill set to Jeff Thomas. He's a 4-star out of Lee High School in Montgomery. He's one that Bama really wants to add to the commitment list, and he's also pushed back a commitment. Originally was supposed to commit August 1st. Now we're going to take his time a little bit, maybe take some visits, but at the end of the day, it's expected to be a Bama-Auburn situation with Bama the favorite today. You mentioned Nico Collins, of course, arguably the top player in the state, a big weapon, 6'5", 200 pounds now. He's polished up on some of those, young receiver mistakes that maybe he made early on with the route running and the hand consistency. So he's becoming what we all maybe thought he could a couple years back. So, of course, that means every school in the country wants him, and schools like Michigan and Georgia could be in really good shape for him, despite him being a Birmingham kid not too far from Tuscaloosa. And, of course, right now, publicly, Michigan is his number one school, but like some of the other elite guys we've talked about, in no rush to make a decision. So if Bama's going to make up some ground for Nico Collins, it certainly looks like it will have the time to do so. You would expect him to take in a couple of games at Bryant-Denny Stadium this fall to see how that process of making up the ground unfold. But, of course, Michigan feels pretty good. They've got plenty of buzz nationally as well. So the receiver situation is going to be interesting. So I think that's why Smith becomes such an important recruit for Bama, because there's not a lot of guarantees, I guess, after that point. Jeff Thomas academically, Nico Collins with Michigan and Georgia looming, and even Henry Ruggs with him pushing things back. It gives those other teams that same opportunity to perhaps make up the ground Alabama had gained out to his lead. So receiver is going to be an interesting position for Bama. They're going to take 4 most likely. They've got an in-state commitment from Shadarius Townsend, who's an athlete who could be a receiver too. So it could be a fun group to track, but certainly those are the big names to know.
John, I get to go to the Champions Challenge and call Brian Robinson on Thursday for Hillcrest Tuscaloosa as they take on Demopolis. What are your thoughts on him as a player, and can he have the kind of season like he did last year?
I think he could. You know, he's a classic what you think of when you think of a Bama running back. You know, 6'2", 220 pounds or so, just a big, strong kid who's just rock solid. He's not going to wow you with 4.4 speed. He's not going to juke a defender out his shoes, but he's going to gain 5-6 yards every time he touches the ball. He's not going to fumble. He's going to show endurance and durability. He's going to be in the game in the fourth quarter wearing on a defense. So I think it's really easy to like a lot about Brian Robinson, especially on Friday nights. I mean, we've seen him a lot this off-season in camps and combines in different settings, and he's fine at those. He can play the drills. He can catch the football, things like that. But when you think of Brian Robinson, you think of Friday nights with the pads, running behind those pads, lowering his shoulder, putting moves on guys in the open field. He's a guy who is built for that old school football, I formation, let him run downhill at you, and eventually he's going to pop one on you. He's just a rock solid back with a lot to like. Good kid as well, good character kid. So this is one that I think he's not getting as much pub as maybe he should, because Bama also has a commitment from the #1 player in America, Najee Harris from California. But years from now, I think you could look back and maybe say, oh, well, maybe we should have talked about Brian Robinson a little bit more. Just a rock-solid guy, and then as we've seen in years past, Nick Saban loves those types, and he likes to lean on those guys when they get to college.
How special is Najee Harris? I hear so many great things about him. I've watched his film a lot. And do you believe in the end Alabama can hold on to his commitment?
I'll start with that because that's a question I get a lot. I do think Bama will hold on to Najee Harris. He's a guy who he's a different kid, Luke. I mean, he's a guy who doesn't like the media. He doesn't have Twitter, first of all. That alone should tell you that he's a different kid. He doesn't like all this #1 recruit. He doesn't care about that. And his favorite thing about Bama is that he has to go prove it. He doesn't like the 5-star treatment. He doesn't like going and getting the red carpet at different schools. He likes being a guy who has to go earn it and prove it, and that's exactly what Bama wants in its players, a guy who is okay with competition, embraces competition. So I think all of that really leads me to believe that he will stick with that Bama commitment, and some may not realize, but he's been committed for well over a year now. So I think all of that in the end will keep him on that Crimson Tide commitment list. And in terms of his ability, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go with it. He's 6'2", 230 pounds now, still clocking 4.5 in the 40-yard dash. Our director of scouting at Scout.com, Brandon Huffman, who's seen Najee more than any of us, says even if he was just a wide receiver or just an outside linebacker, he'd still be a 5-star. So this isn't just the best running back in the country. This is one of the best overall football players in America. So a guy who you expect to contribute day one wherever he's playing in Tuscaloosa, and that's why he's important for Bama to keep on that commitment list.
Is he an early enrollee?
He's trying to. That's the plan right now, and of course that would be great news for Bama fans because that's, a month and a half, 2 months left. Bama has to deal with other schools trying to recruit him, so he's trying to finish up academically to get out early. It doesn't happen a lot at his high school, Antioch High School in California, but that is what he's trying to do. Same thing for Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback from Hawaii. So a lot of these contested recruitments, if those kids are willing and able to graduate early, it could certainly help out Bama in terms of them getting on campus early and obviously slow down the recruitment of others because there's just less time for visits and things like that late in the game.
Okay, you brought up Tua T. With all the late buzz going on about Jalen Hurts here in fall camp and getting ready for the USC game, do you think that the Jalen Hurts potentially playing some this year and maybe even starting eventually could affect Tua T and the other quarterback commitment, Mac Jones?
I don't think so. I know it won't affect Mac. He's a kid who he's already talked to me openly about redshirting. He wants to sit and learn. That's part of the reason he flipped his commitment from Kentucky, where obviously the path to playing maybe a little easier, to Alabama. He wanted to develop and prepare with a roster like that and play every day. With Tua, it's the same thing. He doesn't talk about it as much. And other schools are surely going to use that because he's one that they're really still contesting for. USC, UCLA, Oregon, where they've done pretty good with a former alum of his high school, Marcus Mariota. So Oregon's going to keep pushing for visits, things like that, and that's something that I could see them using. But if you think Najee Harris is a different kid, and we talked about him earlier, Tua is on a level of his own. He does have Twitter, but this is a kid who football is just so far down the priority list. In a good way, meaning, he's a very faith-based kid. That's what drew him to Alabama, to Nick Saban. He went to church with the team, and he was all but sold. So I think it's just beyond football for him, and a depth chart is the last thing a kid like that is going to focus on in his final evaluation with the school. It was more about Nick Saban, the values of him and the program and the direction and Tuscaloosa itself, things like that, which is what really sold him. Everything else, it seems like, is a bonus. Even when he won the Elite 11, for goodness sake, Luke, he's talking about other guys the whole time. He did not mention himself until I basically forced it out of him a couple of weeks ago in Oregon when he was basically named the best quarterback in America. So that's the type of kid he is, a different, mature level kid. So I don't think something as small as a depth chart will perceive him to be pushed away for any other school.
John, maybe I'm reading a little too much into this. Maybe you weren't being quite as cryptic as I think you were, but about 4 or 5 hours ago you had a tweet that said, cue the committable offer tweets. What were you referring to there?
Well, it seems like every day there's a kid who has a verbal offer from Alabama who commits somewhere else, and the corresponding media will say, well, they beat Bama for kid XYZ, and there was another one that happened today. Now, he's one who did have an official offer, Hamza Nasser-Rildeen, but after his summer performances, we were told that Bama and Florida, two of his top 4 schools, wanted to take a second look at him. He's a big kid, 6'4", north of 200 pounds, listed as a safety, and he worked out as such at those schools, but he's so big that he could fill out, and he's such a physical presence that you wonder about outside linebackers. So it doesn't mean Bama didn't want him or Florida didn't want him, but I don't think either of the two were pushing for him as much as South Carolina or Florida State were, and South Carolina obviously won out for that commitment today. But certainly it always pops up this time of year. But there's only a certain amount of offers that go down, and when these kids are ready to commit, there's a very small group of them who could actually pick Alabama at this time. And it's nothing against a kid like Hamza. Great kid. I actually disagree with Alabama. I think he's a great project, a guy who can play multiple positions. I would have taken him today, but I strongly do not believe Alabama would have taken him today. So that was the reason for that. It's just something, again, we see over and over again, and unfortunately it's not going to stop. But it's hard to do your homework with something like that. You wish they would try a little bit more, make some phone calls, but it's just the nature of the game and headlines and getting people to click on your stories.
Well, John, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Everybody go follow him at John Garcia _Jr. and listen to the podcast Crimson and Blue Chips. He put a new one out today. It talks all about Devonta Smith and compares him with Jerry Jeudy, Alabama's other wide receiver commitment. Can't wait to listen later tonight. John, thanks again, buddy.
Thanks so much, Luke. You take care.